Hi, everyone. Welcome to AI to the Future, Why African Leaders Matter. My name is Uzodin Maiwala, and I'm the CEO of the Africa Center here in Harlem, New York City. And we're so excited that you're joining us today for this very important conversation featuring 3 African leaders in tech. So I'm joined today by Jackie Mwangi, the energy sector lead at Frame, a leading source of insight into Africa's fastest growing markets. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be on this panel.
Really great to see you and good to have you. I'm also here with Dr. Vukosi Marivate, who's the ABSA Chair of Data Science at the University of Pretoria. Hi, Vukosi, how are you?
Hi, everyone, and also great to be here.
And last but not least, we have Mutale Nkonde, who's the leader and founder of AI for the People, which is a communications firm whose mission is to use art and culture to empower general audiences to combat racial bias in technological design. Mutale, good to see you.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
So here at the Africa Center, our work is focused on transforming narratives about Africa, our continent, and its diaspora, by centering human stories of the continent and its people in contemporary culture, policy, and business. And so we're bringing you this program today to explore the role of technology in the lives of people of African descent across a variety of fields. I really hope that you find this discussion today interesting and informative. And please be sure to follow the speakers to keep updated and support the work that they're doing around AI and really bringing that knowledge to the people. And you can also keep in touch with us at the Africa Center by following us at the Africa Center. That's at the Africa Center, spelled ER, the American way. I know we're here in New York, on all of the platforms, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, etc. Just follow us and you'll be able to get a good look at the different programs that we're doing, the different people that we interact with who are really all about bringing the stories of the continent and the diaspora to all of you out there in the world. So we're really excited. And without further ado, I will just get into this question about artificial intelligence with our friends here on the panel. By first saying really quickly, we talk a lot about artificial intelligence. People say AI this, people talk about machine learning, they talk about, self-driving cars, automated this and that. And the thing is, I don't think that we all really know what we're speaking about when we speak about artificial intelligence. So, I'm going to throw it out because you're all experts in this, but if we want to just come up with a quick definition of what we mean by AI or artificial intelligence when we use the term in the world, let me just throw it out to all of you and see, let's see if we can build that for our audience.
I think from our perspective, certainly as a communications firm, we like to keep it very simple. So we'll say any technology that has some type of human capability. So think of the 5 senses. If your technology can see, if your technology can hear, if it can sense you, then it certainly has computational elements that use machine learning. So machine learning is a branch of computer science where we teach machines to do simple tasks by giving them lots of exposure to that task being done on multiple times. It learns the task and then it can perform. So an example of that would be when you go on social media and you are shown by Facebook a group to join. What's happened is that there are algorithms that have been trained to look at the things that you like, the things that you comment, the things that you retweet. And that is a machine learning process that will make a prediction to say, oh, this happened to me a couple of years ago. I was looking for boots on one platform. When I went to Facebook, those same boots were then recommended for me to look at. So that's the learning capability.
Word. Vukosi or Jackie, do you have any sort of like addition to that definition, which I really like? It just brings it down and like makes it easy for us to like grasp, because I think you start talking about code and all that sort of stuff and people start to be like, I don't know. And then we very quickly get to the robots are coming and they're going to replace us. So, Vukosi, how would you see this?
Yeah, so being an academic and being in the research sphere in this area for the last, I think, decade or two, the classical definition in artificial intelligence is you have a machine. It lives somewhere in some environment. It senses that environment, as Mutale said, and then it performs some action. So keeping to the social media example, maybe another way to look at it, because I work in language, especially, you go on Facebook or Twitter, somebody has written something in one language, and then it translates it into your language. So typically, most people use Facebook in English or Twitter in English. What it will do is that somebody will write in their local language, so that machine has sensed that there's a piece of text that's written, let's say, in Kiswahili, and then now it wants to present it in English, and that's its goal, right? The goal to maximize is to make sure that it translates it as with least error as possible. That's not, as we know, that's not necessarily what happens. If you look at how the current systems are, they are much better than before. But they still need some improvement. And the reason I use this example also in the same way of making sure that we can communicate to the public is that this is not something that started now. You can go back, I think every century on how you can have a machine do the same thing of saying you build something that can sense, make a decision, do something to reach kind of some goal. That's the classical definition. What's inside to get that kind of artificial intelligence to do what it's supposed to do has been evolving over time to where we are.
And Jackie, how would you think about this from your perspective in industry?
I think to conclude what my fellow panelists have said is, when I think of AI from a personal experience, is my phone learns everything I'm putting out, right? So where I like to go, where I live, where I shop, how often I go to a specific place. It's essentially my phone or my computer thinking like me and being able to recognize patterns that are based on how I spend my time and where I spend it. Think about how autocorrect always figures out what language you use, right? Like every time you're typing a sentence, regardless of the language, it will always autocorrect the word, and you have to continue teaching it how you communicate and what you prefer to put out there. So essentially, it's getting computers to think like human beings.
Right. So you guys have given some really good examples from everyday practical things that we use. But I want to push. So how far away are we from the robots are coming? For example, I grew up reading a lot of science fiction, and one of the sort of premier science fiction authors here in the United States is Isaac Asimov, right? Wrote I, Robot. I think that's formed a lot of people's understandings of kind of what a non-human intelligence that we have created looks like. And just for the sake of setting the scene, like how far away are we from something like that? And how worried should I be that I'm going to be usurped by a robot?
I always tell people that I live in the village of New York. And one of the things here is, if you have Siri, I personally don't, because I have privacy concerns and I don't want to teach any technology to do anything to pattern match me. But I do go to many people's homes and they'll say things like, Siri, turn on my favorite song. Tell Amazon I want this book. Some crazy person was like, Siri, how much money do I have in the bank? And I nearly threw myself on the floor because I could not believe that they had linked their financial information. But Siri is a robot, not in the way that we think about iRobot, but that is a machine that you are training to meet your needs. If we think about the way that it was developed in the lab, it was supposed to be a mechanical servant, right? And those are in our everyday life. If you use self-checkout when you go to a store, instead of going to a human being, you're scanning that. That's a form of a robot. If you here in New York, they were training robotic dogs to go into dangerous sites, the police. and go and do reconnaissance. These are robots, but we don't think about them because they don't look like Will Smith. They don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. There is no storyline. But what it's doing, and the thing I love about the Africa Center is this idea about narrative, is that it's acculturating us to have these conveniences without scaring us into thinking that we are robots. And in terms of how far they are away, I always tell my friends, my family are so disappointed I didn't end up being a medical doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. And I keep saying to them, but I know about AI and I know how to design a system that means we don't need surgeons. I could just design a mechanical arm that would be.
Hold on. Don't be putting a lot of African folks out of a profession. Don't be dashing the hopes and dreams of many Africans.
I'm just saying, us tech kids, us African tech kids may have some ideas for you. We can design mechanical arms that will be more precise than any human hand. In the legal field, Ernst & Young, accounting field, I'm sorry, they bought a software that could review documents faster than their people. These are white collar professional jobs, but because they have very, very patterned behavior, you can actually develop a system that can learn how to optimize, which is, the goal that you want to get to with any technology, to do that better than a human.
That is as somebody who spent 4 long years in medical school, that is a very sobering and troubling thought. But also, I think in some senses a positive one. It's funny, just this morning, my younger brother's an orthopedic surgeon, and he was sharing pictures of surgery that he did entirely with a robot. So I guess you're right. He's like, some things work a little bit better with those steady robotic hands. But let's shift now that we've kind of set the scene or understand a little bit more what AI actually is in a general sense. Let's talk a little bit about what it means when we're talking about the continent and where we are with artificial intelligence, whether we're talking about the study or the uses, the applications when it comes to Africans in the diaspora. I mean, I'll start just with that, that story. And I think, Mutale, we were on in a conference before where we talked about the Google AI software that was that was matching, or that mistook Black people for simians, right? For apes, right? And things like that. And so, and that suggestion that that's a direct result of us not actually being involved in the programming of some of these, or the training, I should say, of some of these systems, because as much as they can be automated, they have to be trained. So where are we on the continent? Let me actually go to Vukosi, if you can just tell us a little bit, since you're in the academic space with this, you're studying this stuff at University of Pretoria. Like, how would you rate where we are as a continental people?
So when we think about now shaping how AI really comes into our society, we are playing catch up. Right. So on one part, you can say if you live in the US, or in the West, you are playing catch up because a lot of these technologies have kind of come to permeate your daily life on there. But then within, I think, the global South, it's even worse because the shaping of how those technologies are actually built is not even done here. A lot of it, we've had those metaphors that, hey, data's the new oil, let's build all these technologies to harvest data within our countries. But in the same way we had extractive colonialism, you're having it in the same way of there's these services that are free, people use them, your data gets taken, it goes somewhere else. And in most, now, we don't have, if you don't have good data governance or policy that says, for your country, the data should stay within your borders on those things, it goes away. These systems then are trained in some way and then fed back. But then now, obviously, there's many micro design decisions that are being done by engineers on a daily basis. And if now those aren't done by people here, that's when then you will find these things that are very glaring of oh, how did this happen that you did this mistake? In language, as I said, continuing my example, you see it in the really bad translation sometimes. It's become even a game sometimes that people just screenshot, here's what Facebook said about the thing that you said in Setswana, and on that part, then they share it and they laugh, but then it's oh no, this is you're hitting kind of the edge and really pulling back the curtain. That in this case, there's not much. There are challenges with getting kind of parallel data to build language systems and all that, that comes with it. But on the other side, also the way that data or models are being built might not actually meet, if we say, oh, what's the minimum quality we should accept before it gets actually deployed? It's very different if it's actually, for you, all you see it as, oh, it's a score and we've met the score. But for a person who that's their lived reality, they have to speak in Fon, they have to speak in Swahili, in isiZulu, and they're trying to now use a system and it keeps on failing them. That's something where they kind of really push. And I'm not even using the examples. I know we will talk now really at the edge of how dangerous sometimes this could be, because if you get into automated systems that then are making decisions that could be life and death, you can extend this example to be on that point. But at the same time, I think the continent has been pushing back in some ways, because we've had, whether it's on an African continent, the diaspora, movements like the Deep Learning Indaba, who I'm a co-founder, Black in AI, Data Science Africa, Data Science Nigeria, who've been working to really get to a point of, let's build our community, a work to share the great work that's going on, and then build our research capacity in such a way that those industries are here and they're built, they're working here, instead of what we have, typically, when people are saying, oh, we have big tech companies on the African continent, they just have their business and legal offices, right? That they don't have any technologists working in there. And in the same time, how are we building those same type of companies here and working for them to kind of bring what we value into the design of the systems that they actually would be building? And that's a place we still have to kind of to work on. At the same time, we know almost being like, oh, we have to catch up. But it's not really about catching up. I think it's really defining what is it that we want out of these, and getting the public to also understand that these systems are already here. For me, it's not, oh, the robots will come, there'll be one day and then we're running around. It's as Mutale said, it's gradual, it's convenience, and then it's there.
Right.
Like your email auto-completes. All those small things. It doesn't. You've learned Google Fu. You've learned all the very, very small little things. But if you go back 20 years ago and you showed somebody that, they would go like, oh, that's crazy that happens. But we've taken it as oh, that's an expectation. I will type something in my email and will autocomplete. Right. Yeah, that's how you're accepting. But that's a machine that's making those decisions. Right. And then now you then go where else are these type of machines deployed?
Yeah, I have to say it is interesting when you mention that, because I get very weirded out by the email autocomplete, especially as somebody who writes books for a living, where I'm like, is this thing going to start writing my books for me? And so I think it is strange, that sort of that creep. How do you go broke, right? Very slowly first, and then all of a sudden. And I think, it sounds like the all of a sudden will be probably sooner than we think in many places. And we definitely need to be prepared. But Jackie, I want to go to you, because you're working with Frame, which is a software that is essentially data collection. Maybe tell us a little bit about Frame, and then your experience of building an AI tool, an imaging tool, mapping tool on the continent, and sort of what that has taught you about where we are and where you see things going.
So Frame is a geospatial analytics company, and what we provide is characteristic data on population. So being able to describe a population from a perspective of socioeconomics, demographics, access to energy, access to healthcare, literacy levels, being able to think about what is a community's connectivity to the grid, for example, or connectivity to major infrastructure and mobile networks, is what we're providing to some of the players in the global development space and private sector companies. Now, what Frame leverages on is existing data. So there's a lot of data that has been collected voluntarily through surveys. These are usually demographic health surveys that have been deployed, say, by USAID, that wants to understand what is the access to healthcare, but they also ask questions around financial inclusion, gender of the household, the age of the household members. And what we're also bringing to the table is where are these households, right? So down to a square kilometer, where are these people that we're talking about? What do they look like? And what do they need? And providing governments and global development agencies with the right answer to what do these people need from a priority perspective? Is it access to healthcare? Is it access to energy? Is it more schools? How do we bring these people online from an energy perspective? Now, a lot of questions that we get is, can you identify a person from the data that we're using? And the answer is no. So Frame does not provide any personal identifiable information. So we can't say that this person in Nairobi, Kenya is Jackie, and this is where she lives, and this is what she needs. Essentially, we're trying to amalgamate demand or access characteristics for a community. This is very crucial when you're thinking about funding that is coming into a country. It's best that the use of data is relied on to provide sort of like insights on what is the right programming. Think about, there's a huge conversation about access to energy or food security. We need to understand which communities are more in need than others. A lot of funding that comes in is usually focusing on urban areas, but we understand that there's rural communities that need those services or those programs probably more than the people who are already connected are in urban areas. So as much as we're afraid of our data being out there, our data is also useful by being out there. It helps governments understand what communities need and how to deploy those resources, and also help people in understanding where the resources are being deployed. I think there's a lot of concern when it comes to data and privacy, and I think we've all touched on it, on what kind of data is out there about me. And we're constantly producing data. We just hope that it's not used for us, but I think it's a double-edged sword. It could be helpful for us, but it could also be harmful.
I want to go to Mitali, because I feel like maybe you might have a bit of a challenge to this, given some of the work that you've done. And I get what you're saying, Jackie, in terms of data being useful. And then we all talk about sort of amalgamated data, right? This idea that we scrub the data of personal identifiers, but Mitali, in the work that you do, I just wonder how do you think about that in detail, especially when it comes to, again, who ends up using the data, who ends up owning the data, and are we really, like, is privacy all that private these days?
So the thing that really got me into where I am now is a paper that was written by a woman called Latanya Sweeney, who's a data scientist at the Harvard Kennedy School. And what she had done was taken anomalized data and through 9 data points, been able to get the health records of the governor of Massachusetts. And what she was really doing in that paper was challenging this idea of anomalization. I will say I do agree with Jackie. And the thing that I like about Frame is that they are not coming and trying to steal your data. They're not telling you to take a quiz and then, uprooting democracy. They're taking surveys that are already there. So in that way, they're definitely not predatory. But the problem that I would have from a US perspective, and I don't know the Dataverse in Africa enough to know whether there are data brokers that information could then be sold onto, and that it's usually in the sale of the data brokers. So for people that don't know, when we give our information for a survey, they could get, they could give you healthcare or housing or whatever your need, but they can also then sell that demographic data to a police force, for example, and then that police force use it to model a population for predictive policing. This happens in New York City. It happens in the United States. Also happens in places like China, who really control much of Africa's data economy and then use against us. So I definitely caution against population type, type businesses, because we just don't have governance structures to even protect the companies from themselves. So it's not really at the, the frame level or even the individual entrepreneur level. This is a much bigger international problem. And then putting my hat on really as a founder and somebody who's looking at the VC space, and I'm really interested in deploying capital into Africa. So because I'm Zambian, I grew up in the UK, I've got the passports. If I need to travel, I can travel. That's what I tell people. But, I'm an American citizen, so that's given me access to potential LPs and others where millions of dollars could be funneled into startups like Pharma that sit on the continent and others, using the talent that we already have to build the systems. That's really a vision that I have. And the concern I have about that, even as a funder, somebody that wants to build an African AI system, is what are the governance structures? Because I would hate to be helping a company, an AI company in Africa, and I'm looking at profitability, and I'm then saying to that company, the best thing that you could do is sell to XY companies so that you can exit, knowing that they're going to take that data and weaponize it against Africans, particularly given the work that I do and how passionate I am for the use of AI to solve big problems like climate and food access and farming, as opposed to population level problems, which is when you get into this idea of individual rights. But we do need those companies. It's complicated. I wouldn't fund them, but we do need them.
I want to come back to this idea of funding in a second, just because I think it is so important, especially when it comes to the development of AI and sort of our progress. But I do want to pick up on something you said, and maybe throw it to Vukosi and Jackie. And you mentioned, for example, China having a lot of access to data from the continent. And so my question is, are they using this data for their own AI systems? And what are those AI systems that they're building? And this is for everyone, but what are those systems designed to do vis-a-vis us on the continent and the diaspora?
Yeah, I think this goes back to what I touched on of being, again, extractive, right? Services are being put together and then being used in one way, kind of another, without the knowledge, as Mutale said. So one, I think, I'm trying to remember which the country was where there were deployments of things like facial recognition from like there's companies both in the West and the East.
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe, right? And then for them, then the data is then actually used to actually fit Black faces better, because then the Chinese government was using it to better improve their systems for tracking people in China, right? So you can see, like, it's a system. Then it's like, oh, we need to harvest data, so we'll make it free or easy to install, but at the same time, it's going somewhere. And then it's being used for something else. And this goes back to the data governance thing, right? Of saying, and I've been discussing this for a while. So I've been both in industry, government, and in academia. So the nice thing by being that I keep those connections and I still work within those spaces. And when you then work with policymakers, you then get into this challenge of, do they understand, like, what actually is going on? If you're saying they're supposed to guard us, do they even have the requisite skills to be able to understand when they're sitting across from an organization that says, this is what we are about to do? They don't look at it as, oh yeah, this is a great, it's a magic box and it solves the thing. And the way that it typically creeps in a lot of places is in the name of safety, right? So this is going to be something that makes everybody safer. So we're going to put in facial recognition. This is going to be something that makes everybody safer. So what it's going to do is intercept all the text messages and read them, right? This is and then what this then becomes is like almost like, sorry, in the Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan's one, you have this machine that is now kind of deployed everywhere and it's just harvesting information and you don't know ultimately, right? And that's why, when Lucius Fox then says he's going to quit his job and no longer work with that, because it's like you then have this power of making choices that people don't even know are happening in the background. And this is, again, it's gradual, but then it's there. All right. And that's where we're now with governance across the continent. When you're looking at that, you find different countries have different things. So South Africa has POPIA, which is trying to look at the privacy issues and the security, and then some of the security issues. But I don't think it does enough about what actually ends up with the data at the end. It says when you're getting the data, you must declare what's being done. But then even in that process of staying within that, then there's the junior data scientist who's making these, again, micro decisions that ultimately become these systems that actually have an impact on people's lives, and they don't know, right? That's how exactly it works. It's just some fine print in the thing that you sign. And again, it comes back to that thing. Have we had a discussion as society of what our expectations of these little machines actually is?
Yeah, and so, go ahead, Natalia.
And Vikosi, that's really the work in this initial business. So AI I've always had a business. So this is like my latest one. But one of the things that we identified as a gap for, and why we created AI for the People, was I had worked with Google, and I realized that they had a Google Creative Lab that really told the story of us accepting using search and getting all of these answers without saying the back end, which was harvesting of data, creation of other tools. We then see Alphabet being created, and they're making everything from cars to maps and with all of this search data. And for me, people laugh, and I'm saying I've done this work for so long that if you ever find me living in a tree with no phone, just myself and my family, you'll know that I've found some sensor near my house and I can't take it anymore. And I think unless we use the medium of television, film, and journalism. And specifically in the US, that's the first market that we went into. And we're now doing much more work in the UK. So we're thinking about shows that we have here, like Black Mirror and others, and how do we implant those storylines? So we've done everything from, we've just been nominated for an Emmy this year for a piece that we did. We are really looking, having conversations in Hollywood to say, before these things creep in, how can we create that national conversation that you're describing, so that we have governance systems that allow us to allow innovation and allow the growth that will come from innovation while protecting our rights. And many people on the development side and on the research side just want to make the machine. And my thing is, if the machine is going to be made more efficient to track me and put me in jail, then I don't want the machine.
Jackie, as a maker of one of these machines, and just before, I wanna, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, tongue in cheek, but I also just want to make sure that we maintain that connection, because we've talked a lot about data, but really, just to go back to what you all said at the beginning, AI and data are kind of inseparable. Like, in order for an AI to work, you need to train it with data. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, which is why the data conversation becomes so important. So now Jackie is creator of one of these machines that is hoovering up all these data. I mean, your thoughts on Mutale's desire to live in a tree at some point in time?
Well, I think we are all reflecting one thing, that is, there's no framework in which AI is regulated. There's no framework in which we can fall back on and say these are the thresholds of use of data, or this is the infringement on data privacy. I feel like a lot of conversations on AI, at least on the continent, is still very siloed. So you'll find the government is thinking about AI as an innovation space, and it's left for the techies. And it's like this side of government, or like this side of technology that no one's really looking into. But if you think about how social media has rolled out AI, it's made it a multi-purpose platform, but governments are now struggling to think about how do we regulate this while it's already widespread. Data is already being collected, we're already producing data voluntarily and involuntarily. I think we probably need to start thinking about how do we bring the conversation to the policymakers? How do we start to think about the right way to regulate it? Not too much that it's rigid and stifles innovation, but in a way that creates a healthy environment, an ethical environment in which data can be used, but also data also is protected. I think one of the other things to consider is Africa's biggest companies are still very low on uptake of AI themselves. So you'll find a lot of companies that have already adopted AI, are using it in a very limited way. It's probably a very expensive technology. They have to rely on talent from outside the continent. They have to bring in technology that is not developed on the continent. And even so, they're using it in a very siloed way. They're not using it as an enterprise solution. So the many facets in which we can think about responsibility for use of AI and ethical use of data. And lastly, as a population in Africa, we're still struggling with data literacy. We don't understand what kind of data is the right data to put out there. Connectivity to the internet is still very patchy when you're thinking about connecting people in last mile and rural populations. How do you provide connectivity to them as well? So I think it's a multifaceted conversation, and there's different stakeholders to think about.
When you start to speak about the educational aspect, and again, I'll just go to Vukosi and Mutale, because I think you guys deal with education on different levels. Vukosi, as a professor in the sort of university system about this, are we training people fast enough to be able to deal with this, and what can we do?
I think in this one, now being a scholar and a teacher at the same time is thinking about the more kind of societal impact issues on there. So I coordinate the Masters in Data Science at our university, and there, as in the first year, the students have an ethics class, but in the second year, when they do their capstone project, they also then have to think about the more bigger term. Like some of the things that we do is use things like model cars that were developed specifically to say, when you're developing a machine learning or AI model, you should also say, where did the data come from? How was it designed? How could it be misused? What are the challenges that it might face, and on all that part? But then you ask yourself and saying, as Jackie was saying, you can just go for the technical thing. It's an interesting technical problem. Go build a cool thing. Right, that's the challenge we have on that part. That a lot of people will focus on, let me go build a cool thing, right? Because that's where you get a lot of the incentives within our space is on the cool thing. But for me, given my the work I've done in the past, I know how hard it is to go from the cool thing to something being in somebody else's hand, and then also making sure it doesn't do things that it's not supposed to be doing. That is very hard. And as such, sometimes you have this gap between whether it's academia and industry, and then industry and public service on all these things. And it then becomes that people don't understand each other. They don't understand what's actually supposed to go on. So there are more and more of people like me, researchers who work within all of the spaces, just to go in, because then you get yourself to actually be able to interact with policymakers, take the time to educate them in the way that you can, and at the same time go back to the students and give them a view of what the real world looks like, right? Of you're not going to make a decision almost like in the basement of big company X and not think about actually the humans who are going to use the thing that I'm building, right? And that then means we have a responsibility, and I think as being part of the university, shaping the thoughts of on creating the future, to do that. It is not just about the cool thing. You will get to the cool thing. We love the math. I love the computing. I love the engineering of all that. But I also want to deal with a lot of our, improving the lives of South Africans and Africans. And to do that, you need to understand on the other part of, what happens now if you make tweaks like this? Like we for example, had to stop a one of our models in translation, just because, like, we had a lot of people sending us feedback. It was a research model, even not even a production model, just saying it's available. But then we were getting so many visceral reactions to it. We're like, oh, we should actually go back and then try to figure out what the heck is going on within these spaces. But this is much harder, right? If it's, again, a big company that is somewhere else on this part. And I think this brings us a little bit to the conversations we are now having to have about that. If we don't teach these things and people don't shape it and they don't see this, then we end up having what we're seeing in terms of misinformation on social media, right? And this affects us a lot on in the global South, because as per the Washington Post report, 90% of Facebook's users are outside the US and Canada, but Facebook only devotes 13% of its resources to fighting abuse in those areas. That shows you, like, and then once you actually, like, you move out of English, that even in America, that's like, all bets are off. Right. So now you could have whatever's happening in, like, in Eritrea, in Ethiopia, like, what's happening in Eswatini, where then it's like, oh, let's actually even switch it off. So these things are not, again, they're not random.
Right. But let me get into it as well a little bit. Jakir and Matthias, since you guys have also spent a lot of time just on this, what is, and because you talked a little bit about, the technical kind of aspects of things. And, I'm interested in, I think, for folks who are not as well versed as yourselves, what does it take to build a thing? Just before we even get into the ethical stuff, I mean, what does that team look like? So, I imagine a bunch of coders who are sitting there, like, doing their thing on those, like, matrix-like screens. And then how do you get from that to I don't know, something, my phone basically completing my emails for me, or deciding who to respond to, essentially?
Practice is the simple part to that, because these are machines. So anything as simple as a model walking in a straight line in robotics, that to the human eye seems like a very, very, very simple thing to do, but you have to be able to train it at every point to anticipate the level of the floor, whether it's windy, whether it's sunny. How do you want it to walk? Are the people on your research team, are there people that are in wheelchairs, so they're going to have different ideas about travel and motion? Are the people able-bodied, so they have so if it were on many of the research teams I was on, we were all able-bodied. So if we had been told to develop a walking robot, the robot would have stood up and walked. But there are other ways that people travel, and we didn't even have the idea of that. And just to go back to your last response, Vikosi, you are a pioneer. I'm in graduate school at Columbia right now, and I was in a meeting with Columbia Engineering about how do they integrate the human into design challenges. So I'm really, really glad that it's happening in South Africa, because I keep telling people I live in the village of New York. The people were arguing. They were like, no. We just want to optimize for the machine. So I really appreciate that work is being done on the continent. But to go back to the response, people, as we're testing our models and as we're testing our hypothesis, I think the general public really underestimate how difficult it is to even get an email to write a exclamation mark at the end of a sentence. That could be 20 years of research, for example, or for a machine to recognize your face. And that's why these machines work so famously badly, because what we do in business is that we release the minimum viable product. What that means is that it's not pretty, it probably doesn't work, and then you rely the process that Vikosi was talking about, you just then get feedback, because until you actually test your model, you don't really know what it does. But the way that we market technologies and the way that we fund technologies means that we have to promise that the thing will work so that we can get the money to keep developing the product. And it's that misalignment of incentives that has us in this really uncomfortable space. So, I work in the civil sector with this communications firm. It's a nonprofit. The reason that it's a nonprofit is that I'm an immigrant to the US, and I was trying to figure out how, as an immigrant, do you meet billionaires and millionaires and people with private wealth? You start a nonprofit because those people, because of tax incentives, if they like your idea, they're gonna invest. That was because I was interested in a for-profit play, which was the development, right? But as a funder, I don't necessarily care about ethics. I care about you telling a customer that it's going to do something and then working it out. Misalignment. And then as academics, they have to actually have rigor. So you can't just publish a paper, and methodology is so across all the three fields that I come across AI, none of us are aligned, which is why we need standards. And I know we've spoken about that.
Right. And Jackie, on that sort of like movement from, with Frame, I was lucky enough to see it in sort of various iterations, and, like what you're able to do in terms of the data collection and then some of the applications and mapping. I mean, what was that process like? I mean, how many folks were involved in, and, don't give away trade secrets, but, like in getting from to the interface that we see, which does all this, marvelous, like, graphic mapping of some of these things. But, where did that start, and who was involved in that?
For us, it's essentially beginning from looking at sample data. So what data has been collected about a population, understanding in depth what multiple data sets are available to describe a population in a particular geographical location, and understanding more about that geographical location. So we could assume, for the sake of this conversation, that there's a population in Nairobi that probably has more women than men. The average age is 35 to 50. The literacy levels are high education, and the asset ownership is basically transport assets and a lot of household appliances. The access to energy looks like 90% connectivity to the grid, and they spend about $200 a month on energy. And we are able to understand the household. So the next step is, can we understand the environment in which this household exists? So this household is in an area that is, say, semi-arid. These are the environmental conditions around this household, and probably they influence where and how this household behaves, and then being able to use this information to train the model to predict where else there could be people who look like this. So it's about predicting if the people in another semi-arid area look like the people in Nairobi, or do the people in another semi-arid area with certain qualifications, how do they rank in relation to what we know about this population in Nairobi? And the more we know about a population that looks like the population in Nairobi, how many times can we predict correctly, or at least to a certain degree that's close to the truth, where a similar population is prevalent, and being able to run this model. So the more we know about a population, the more we can predict where a population characteristic is the same as where we know. And it's helped us in terms of thinking about comparing populations in rural Mozambique and another population in rural, say, Mali, because of similarities like the household composition, access to energy, access to financial inclusion, gender composition, and other similar characteristics. And taking another example of kind of how does this compare with a household in rural Egypt? Can we predict that they look the same? Are they different? How different are they? Is our model off? How can we go back and sort of like improve on our prediction? So it's not really about can we describe one human being, but can we describe populations that are very similar? And it's very useful in terms of deploying resources when you're thinking about global development sector, but also investments for opportunities in private sector. Where is there a market that looks like the market in Nairobi? Could it be in Accra? Could it be in Ouagadougou? And what does that translate into for opportunities for expansion?
Right. So lots of applications, lots of sort of, whether we're talking business. I mean, I think one of the things that people think about a lot is defense with, people put up the pictures of drone swarms and then the question about how far behind are we? I think there was that whole thing about an article not too long ago about the first automated drone killing in Libya. That was I'm not sure if you guys saw that a little bit ago, where I think it gets people's thought processes when you start combining that with the idea of facial or sort of like recognition of humans and who's programming, whether or not we're setting ourselves up as Africans for disaster, basically. But that brings me to a question that's just come in, which is really about this idea of bias, right? So, I bring up that example of the Libya thing because it's like, who's training it to recognize who? And I think one of the questions that here is how, to go a little bit deeper into this understanding of bias, right? And, the bias that is inherent in certain systems, depending on who programs or codes or trains an AI to do what it does. We're running short on time, so I'm going to throw that out there. But if we can get some just quick thoughts from you guys about bias and its importance, Mutale.
Teams that are not diverse, for example, don't have Black people on them, are not going to be able to develop technologies that see us correctly. And we can look to the work of Joy Bulawami, who's an American Ghanaian computer scientist. And she really was pioneering in finding that out about facial recognition. But if she were a white man, she would never have even needed to do that research study.
Yeah. And Vukosi, in terms of this idea of bias, how do you see it in the work that you do?
Yeah, this, as I said, goes towards how we evaluate the efficacy of a system. So who looks at it if at the end the first few tests are just with people who are like you, you will miss a lot of people. But we've been through the systems of having the infrared thing that you're supposed to wash your hands not working. And again, that's because it is developed, again, very simple one, but you can always extrapolate it to these decisions that are being made later, because all you need to do is adjust the intensity and it will then take care of more skin types. But because the person who's adjusting for it was just testing in the in the factory or in the lab and saying, oh, it works. But that small decision then permeates kind of on that part through a lot of these systems. So there's a lot. And also participation, I think, of our communities within this design is very important to actually go against that issues of bias.
It's funny, I was just on a practical note, I was in an airport, I think it was in Portugal, passing through, and I needed to wash my hands. And I couldn't because it wouldn't sense me until I took a white paper towel and put it underneath the soap dispenser. And then I was able to get soap. I was like, yeah, it's real. It's very real. Jackie, bias.
I would say inclusion of the originators and custodians of the data. When you include people who the data has been collected on, and you give them authority of how the data should be used or what's the best use of the data, I think it also brings in the range of which diversity can play, like different skin tones, different facial structure, different heights, different bodies. Every human being is different. As many people as possible being on the table as custodians or the originators of the data being present is definitely a requirement.
Right. And then another thing that's just come in from someone, and we'll take maybe 2 minutes to answer this so I can let you all kind of give a final thoughts, is I think folks are very concerned about extraction, with ideas of whether we're talking about extracting the minerals to run this tech fourth industrial revolution situation that everybody is going gaga over, to the idea of extracting data. And you all have spoken about it in some detail about frameworks, right, that prevent, but frameworks that prevent us from or prevent companies or people from using this sort of in an extractive manner. But can we really get around this idea of extraction? And if extraction or ability to prevent is related to the power, and we're looking at our countries, and we're not in the best positions when it comes to telling other people what to do with who we are, or are we? Is that a wrong statement on my part?
Yeah, I'll go quickly in there. Again, it comes down to having a good policy. The EU has gone, they're even kind of getting their regulations around AI going along. If you think about the continent, it's why the AU has to be having conversations about this and getting really active in making sure they can map out these policies and also map out the future and the way that it should be done. So in this case, it's basically what you allow. If you allow it, it's definitely going to happen, right?
Yeah.
I would agree really quickly that this is larger than the individual. So you've already talked about the AU, but people really laugh when I say I'm going to live in a tree, because I do not want to give my data up. I disable everything. I work in AI and I have an extremely low tech life because I understand the power, and I don't want to be, I'm already a colonial subject. I don't want to be a data colonial subject.
I think that might be a new term that we'll start seeing in many places. And Jackie?
One of the things that I'm excited about, at least from a Kenyan perspective, is 2 years ago, the Kenyan government put together a task force that was meant to focus on AI and blockchain. And what this task force brought together was the academia, the research people, business, tech, and a lot of companies that were also looking to get into the African AI space. And by pulling all these minds together, the idea was how do we prepare Kenya, for example, to be AI ready? Like how do we need to take advantage of AI technology in public sector processes, but also how do we identify opportunities for government to invest in? How do we prepare government investments in Tibet, for example, skill development of like the youth, right? The average age of Africa's population is 19 to 20. That means we have to put ourselves in the driver's seat. How do we invest in the youth to be able to take us forward? And inviting youth to leadership, right? Innovation is opening that door wide open for the only people who can move us forward are going to be the youth. They're the people who are seeing, testing, experiencing innovation firsthand. How do we take advantage of this and be able to grow our talent locally? And I think an initiative like that, and like Dr. Vukosi mentioned, Egypt leading the umbrella for AI in the AU space, is also thinking about a continental approach, but we also have country-led initiatives, and then we have private sector initiatives, we have government initiatives, and we also have like academia and research providing their contributions as well.
I think that is a great sort of note for us to end on. So we've got one more minute with this idea of, in essence, this is going to be with us. It's here. And if we want to shape it, it's not just about watching things happen and being consumers of this. It's about getting our folks involved in all the aspects that you talked about in terms of design, in terms of regulation, which, the importance of which you have stressed so much. I think we need to think about that. And also, possibly the uses, right, of AI. What is it that we're actually going to use it for as a society, and who's going to determine that? And it should be us rather than forces that exist outside of us. So look, all of you, I have learned a lot from all of you. I think, I don't know if I'm at the tree stage right now, but I will keep in mind the necessity of privacy protection and regulation as we go forward. But Vukosi, Jackie, Mutale, I want to say a big thank you on behalf of the Africa Center and our audience for your insights and your knowledge. Everybody, please follow the work that they are doing, support the work that they're doing, because these are the folks that are going to really help us determine how we control our own AI future. Thank you to you all, and thank you to everyone out there in the audience for your questions, your thoughts, and for tuning in with us for another Africa Center program online. Take care, everybody.
Home isn't just where we're from. It's the sounds that move us, the stories that shape us, and the flavors that heal us. It's the communities that connect us. The ones that hold us down. The ones that raise us up. Home is a feeling we all know. So if you're looking for it, you can always find it here. The Africa Center. Home is here.